Great, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about Objective 12.1 Darwin. Explain how experiences and people influence Darwin's thinking. This is Charles Darwin. He was born in England on February 12th, 1809, and every year we celebrate February 12th as Darwin Day because of his contributions to science. And this objective is going to focus on him and specifically the experiences and the people that helped him come up with his contribution. In 1831, Darwin was invited to join a ship called the HMS Beagle, and the ship's mission was to travel around mapping out coastlines and harbors. And Darwin was a young man, and he just went on to basically keep the captain company. This was not intended to be a scientific voyage. But as Darwin traveled around, he was really impressed and fascinated by the diversity of life. Notice that he traveled through a lot of kind of tropical areas. Near the equator, where it's warmer, is a higher diversity of life. So Darwin was able to observe all sorts of things. He took really detailed notes and sketches of everything. For example, he visited the Galapagos Islands and he noticed that tortoises on different islands looked different. Like they had different shaped heads. So from the Isabella Island, their shells were kind of like flat, and from the Hood Island, their shells curved up like this, allowing the tortoise to lift its head up. Why do you think that tortoises would have different shaped shells? If you notice, the background here is like lush and green. So this turtle is going to eat grass off the ground, so it's going to keep its head down. Whereas this is sort of like drier and kind of like more like a desert. So this turtle needs to be able to reach its head up to be able to get leaves off of a tree. So Darwin noticed that two places that were located close to each other had similar species, but they were slightly different. We describe this as the ability of species to vary locally. Species in the same area have slight differences depending on their environment. Here's a nice video that explains it if you're interested. Another thing that Darwin noticed was that the variation was not limited to local areas. He noticed that species vary all across the globe. So here we can see images of anteaters and armadillos that look similar, but depending on their environment, they've kind of changed based on the place where they're living. Darwin also collected fossils on his journey, and this led him to conclude that species are able to vary over time. So the armadillo is the common day animal, but Darwin found fossils of glyptodonts, which had the same structure, but they were larger. He said, "This wonderful relationship in the same continent between the dead and the living will, I do not doubt, hereafter throw more light on the appearance of organic beings on our earth and their disappearance from it than any other class of facts." And I hope you can appreciate how special it was that Darwin was traveling around making all these observations. Most scientists would have been kind of like stuck at home or stuck in one place, so they wouldn't be exposed to the same things that Darwin was. And then there were some people who influenced him as well. That's an image of the Grand Canyon. And I want to point out the different colors and the different layers in the rock wall. And I want to point out this river. Have you heard the saying that a drop of water is able to wear away sand over time? Like basically, something as soft as water, if it keeps going through stone, can actually erode it. That's what formed the Grand Canyon. Two geologists named James Hutton and Charles Lyell studied this, and they basically concluded that it must have taken a long time for water to be able to wear away stone. And they concluded the Earth must be fairly old if it had enough time for this to still happen. And also, they noted like it's not done yet, it's going to keep changing. More specifically, Hutton came up with the idea that there are certain geological features like mountains or valleys or ridges that are the same all over the world, and they must be caused by the same geological process. For example, this is a different canyon in Italy, but it was also eroded by water. So our planet must be older than a few thousand years if these processes were happening everywhere. This caused Hutton to come up with the concept of deep time, basically the idea that Earth is older than we can kind of imagine. Lyell had some of the same ideas, but he also talked about how the laws of nature are constant over time. For example, volcanoes have always been erupting. That's how lava ends up coming from the inside of the earth to the outside. They were erupting back then, and they're going to continue to erupt now. So he wanted to apply this law to say that scientists can explain past events by what we're seeing in the present. So even though we couldn't observe a volcano erupting a million years ago, we can infer that's what happened because we can observe volcanoes erupting in the present time. This made Darwin think about if the Earth is able to change, could life change as well? Another person worth mentioning is Lamarck. Lamarck was a naturalist, which is kind of like a biologist who studies nature, and he thought that species could change. For example, this is a water bird, so it has long legs so that its body doesn't get wet when it walks in the water. Lamarck thought that if the bird needed to be able to walk deeper in the water, it could actually stretch itself and cause its legs to grow longer. Or if there was a giraffe eating leaves off of a tree, if the giraffe needed to be able to reach a higher tree, it could stretch itself and its neck would actually grow longer. Lamarck wasn't exactly right because that's not quite how evolution works, but this basic idea that hey, species can change is true. So this individual bird can have longer legs, but over time, the water bird population could evolve to have longer legs. And finally, we have to mention Thomas Malthus. He was an English economist, and in 1798, he wrote an important paper. He noticed that humans were being born faster than people were dying, and this was leading to overcrowding. And he assumed that not everyone was going to be able to keep living, like because the world was so crowded, some people would die. And he said that war, famine, and disease would be able to limit population growth. He was talking about density dependent limiting factors, if you remember those. And Darwin was fascinated by his paper, and he realized that this doesn't just apply to humans, but it applies to all organisms. The idea that too many organisms exist, so only the best organisms are going to survive, and the other ones are going to die off. So, just to summarize, the main experience was his voyage on the Beagle, where he was able to observe how species vary, and he was highly influenced by geologists Hutton and Lyell, Lamarck, who said that species could change, and Malthus, who said that the best fit are going to be the ones who survive. This led Darwin to come up with natural selection. I want to stress that it's really a combination of all of these ideas. It's not one person's idea, it's lots of data and lots of different scientists collaborating to come up with the same idea. And we will discuss natural selection in our next objective. Please let me know what questions you have.